we go. Thanks for joining us, by the way. I really appreciate it, as usual. I'm sure you're getting a lot of calls for interviews these days.
I'm trying to finish a book for Simon & Schuster, so I'm kind of picky, but I'll do you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very, very much. Chris Hedges, you're the author of many books: America, the Farewell Tour, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, and one of my personal favorites, Death of the Liberal Class. When does your new book come out, and what is it focusing on?
So I teach in the New Jersey prison system through Rutgers University in the college degree program, and have for over a decade. And in 2013, I helped my students in East Jersey State Prison write a play that was eventually performed at the theater in Trenton in 2018 and was published by Haymarket Books. So I'm writing a book called The Class, where that's a kind of double entendre, and it's about the writing of the play, because there's nothing in it that didn't happen to someone in the classroom, and using that narrative to look at the monstrosity of mass incarceration and what it does to families and individuals and how the system works. And I think it works. I actually just sent the manuscript this morning, and now we're beginning the copy editing.
Excellent. Well,
it'll be out. It was going to come out in the spring, but because of COVID, everything is backed up. So it'll be out in the fall, next fall.
Yeah, well, I hope we're still all alive to read it. I hate to put it that way, but I'm happy to have you on, because you're always talking about the systemic issues that are more serious than even Trump himself. Can you talk about what we are facing right now in terms of the systemic issues that you see playing out in front of us?
Right. Well, I think it's pretty clear that Biden is going to do nothing to address the issues that and I think others have argued gave rise to a figure, a demagogue, a con artist like Trump. In fact, things are about to get exponentially worse. I covered the war in the former Yugoslavia, so I'm intimately familiar with how societies break down. Also worked in the Middle East for 7 years, and North Africa, 6 years in Latin America, covered the wars in Central America. And I think it's pretty clear that the tinder that could ignite widespread social unrest and violence lies ominously stacked around us. You have millions of very angry, disenfranchised white Americans. This is Trump's base, living in economic and social misery, enraged at political stagnation, the corruption of the ruling class, a bankrupt liberal elite, which the Democratic Party embodies, and this mounting social inequality, which is about to get much worse. That's on one side. Then you have millions more alienated young men and women who've been locked out of the system, and again have a deep animus, and which is totally understandable, against governing structures, and often express this through anti-fascism, and the political center is rapidly disintegrating. And then we have added to this mix the fact that the country is awash in military grade weapons, unable to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic fallout, have unleashed unaccountable, violent, militarized police forces that, in essence, in poor neighborhoods function as internal armies of occupation and de facto allies of these neo-fascists. So, and then we add the fact that we have an estimated 40 million people who will be evicted from their homes because the moratorium on foreclosures and evictions has been lifted by the end of this year. Some, Johns Hopkins, others are estimating that perhaps 400,000 Americans will be dead from the pandemic by 300,000, I think, by December, 400,000 by January.
100,000 people in a month.
Yeah. Well, because it spirals.
Right.
And
unbelievable.
So all of this is kind of coming together I think, and these are very ominous warning signs. Biden has made it clear that he isn't of the Democratic Party, and Biden has made it clear that they're not going to institute the kind of jobs program that might be able to pull us back from the brink. He said if Medicare for All is passed by Congress and it comes on his desk, he'll veto it. He wants to give more money to the police. We won't get into Biden's long, complicity in militarized police, free trade deals, NAFTA, cheerleaders for these endless wars in the Middle East. So, with or without Trump, it's going to be pretty grim. And in fact, I think if Trump is removed from office, this kind of neo-fascist violence will probably get worse.
Can you, you've already painted quite a dystopian picture of what's about to happen. For those people, I think many Americans have never been to a war zone. They've never been through the things that you've seen and studied and then been through yourself firsthand. And they can't imagine what America would look like. They've seen on the news what other countries look like, but what America looks like when it comes to unrest. It's such an enormous nation. Can you really paint us more specifically a picture of what we're looking at?
Well, first of all, every country that I covered that disintegrated, no one could anticipate the social unraveling because the structures remain, the rhetoric remains. I mean, the late Roman Empire, there was still a Senate, Caligula or Nero's, I guess it was Caligula's horse was made a senator, but the structures were still there, even though democratic participation and democratic power had become a burlesque in much the same way that the United States has. So that's the takeaway. I remember when I covered the war in Kosovo, as things were unraveling, I would come back to Pristina, the capital, and meet with my Kosovar Albanian friends, highly educated, very thoughtful, and they would insist, which was also true in Sarajevo at the inception of the war in Bosnia, no, there won't be a war, it won't happen. And it got to a point where I was telling them, well, I was stopped by Kosovo, KLA, Kosovo Liberation Army checkpoints 10 kilometers outside of the city, and they're going, oh, those are just the Serbs dressed up as rebels to justify their oppression. They didn't get it until literally they were shoved onto cattle cars and shipped by train to refugee camps in Macedonia. So the same was true in Sarajevo. I think there's a kind of emotional inability on the part of people to understand, one, how fragile social systems are, and how rapidly they can disintegrate once the foundations are kind of rotted out, which ours are. So, I was quite disturbed by this incident in Portland where Aaron J. Danielson, this is a supporter of the Patriot Prayer Group, who shows up in the city in a truck with a Glock pistol, bear spray, and expandable metal baton. He's shot and killed on August 29th, allegedly by a supporter of Antifa named Michael Forrest in the streets. You can hear a woman on the video clip that was that somebody made shouting, "I'm not sad that an effing fascist died tonight." And eventually, it's this guy, Reinl. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Reinl or whatever it is hunted down by federal agents, shot and killed in Washington State. So that once you create martyrs, which is precisely what that incident did, who are sacrificed for the cause. This was very true in Yugoslavia. It tends to whip up the kind of fury on the polarized extremes, and is used to insist that self-preservation necessitates violence, that it's a prerequisite for the struggle that they're in. And then you get into a whole world that I'm very familiar with, having covered war for so many years, and that's the narcotic or the addiction of violence itself. It fills that kind of emotional void that has attacked so many people who've been disenfranchised by the society. That gives these feelings of godlike omnipotence to people who maybe even weeks before felt powerless. It creates senses of comradeship and belonging to people who were very alienated. It gives people who are social outcasts, who've suffered feelings of rejection and humiliation, a sense of meaning, a higher purpose. It obliterates this despair and replaces it with these ecstatic feelings of self-importance, self-adulation, almost a state of being outside the self. And so then the world devolves into this Manichaean battleground between us and them, the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And my book, War is the Force That Gives Us Meaning, my first book, which is a kind of look at the culture of war, explores in great detail exactly what happens to people who fall into this kind of Manichaean universe where violence is somehow going to purge the society, is a cleansing agent within the society. And we're certainly on the cusp of that. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we don't go over the edge. But all of the pieces are in place.
You've said in the past that the military machine in this country is the greatest enemy of democracy. We haven't been hearing much about the military these days, at least not on the news, while Trump continues to tweet. As we continue down the road to what you've termed, empire collapse, what role do you see the military playing?
Well, I want to make it clear that combat units in the military, like these militias or radical groups that embrace violence, are in and of themselves death cults. For instance, if you attend the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, this is the 8-week course at Fort Benning in Georgia, to become an Army Ranger, the first thing you have to do is pick what they call it a ranger in the sky. This is a ranger who was killed in action, and you have to investigate their life before they enlisted and what their military career was like, and you have to carry this information on a piece of paper with you at all times. It's an inspectable item, and it functions the same way. It lifts these kids out of social obscurity to become heroes, warriors, and that's true whether they're Army Rangers or members of the Patriot Prayer Group, and they have to become willing sacrificial victims. So all the military itself is complicit in this kind of social sickness, indeed fosters it. The military in the United States is untouchable. It's deified. This was also true in the former Yugoslavia. It was true in Weimar Germany. It consumes a disproportionate amount of resources. They've tried to audit it, but you can't audit it. It's never been successfully audited. And as the social fabric unravels, the military will take an increasingly a larger role in terms of the political process. But that is exceedingly dangerous, as history has taught us repeatedly. So some people now the military doesn't want to intervene in the street process, and made that very clear, because they don't need to. Police departments function as paramilitary units with armored personnel carriers. With Ferguson, we saw armored personnel carriers mounted with 50 caliber machine guns, which were pointed as unarmed protesters. So there's no need for the military to kind of engage in this kind of domestic suppression, because the militarized police have more than enough equipment, lethal equipment, to do the job. As things devolve, my guess is that if there is widespread social disintegration, then this is going to push the military to play a larger political role. But believe me, that is will be a very ominous moment in American history.
Chris, some people have said they're hoping that if Trump refuses to leave office after the election, the military will step in and remove him. Your thoughts on this misplaced trust?
Well, there's precisely the problem. That's exactly what I was just saying. That number one, if Trump leaves office, is that the institution we want to turn to? That's called a coup d'état. And at that point, the military becomes almost untouchable, whoever is in office. So, We saw this again in the late Roman Republic, that it was the Praetorian Guard that suddenly was selecting who was emperor and who wasn't. So yes, I think that is another evidence of how people will turn to an institution, which in and of itself is deeply anti-democratic.
Can we talk about the economy for a moment? I was listening to you have a conversation with Professor Richard Wolff, who also comes on this show occasionally, talking about how the banks are hoarding up money. Can you talk about what this means, and what does this mean to our social fabric as you see it's playing its role in the decline?
Right. So the banks know what's coming, and that's why you can't get any loans from banks. And so what does that mean? It means that...
Meaning people can't buy cars or
it's very hard now to get any loans because they're hoarding the money to deal with the wave of bankruptcies, defaults on credit card, student loan, car loans, mortgages, household debt. They know that that's what's coming, and so that's why they're not lending. I mean, the economic situation, and Rick Wolff has probably, I think, done the best job of explaining this, is, if we want to kind of simplify it, is essentially the Fed giving large banks and corporations free money. And what they're doing is investing it in this overheated stock market, often buying back their own stock because their compensation is tied to that. And it's just this kind of shell game where you keep investing. And as Rick said, it's the people who pull out first who win before the crash, but they all know that it's coming. It's not in any way sustainable. So you borrow money at virtually 0% interest. You invest it in the stock market. The stocks go up. Other oligarchs and banks are also getting free money from the Fed and investing in the stock market, playing the same game. And then you just try and whoever pulls out before everything goes south wins. That's what's happening. That's why the stock market has no correlation to the economic distress that is happening throughout the country. I mean, the unemployment figures have always been fixed. The Los Angeles Times a year or two ago ran a whole story about this. This is before the pandemic, estimating that real unemployment is about 17%. I mean, if you stop looking for work, you're not counted. If you're furloughed, and we have millions of workers who've been furloughed since the pandemic, you're not counted as unemployed. If you work an hour a week, you're counted as employed. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. So real unemployment is probably close to 20%. And the ruling oligarchs have made it very clear that they are not going to respond rationally. I mean, the CARES Act has been a giant giveaway to large corporations. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. Things like the cruise industry have been bailed out, equity firms have been bailed out, and people who are really suffering are getting nothing.
Not the cruise industry. Oh my God. It's like, oh no, this is a disaster. Where will Thomas Kincaid hang his paintings? Oh, okay. It's this intersection between the banks and what we're about to see coming is of enormous interest to me. And I'd like to get your perspective, since you know so much about the fall of other countries and republics and empires, or whatever you would want to call it. What happens economically? I mean, at some point, those people who are playing the shell game really cannot function. Am I accurate? If the bottom completely falls out of the middle and under classes, isn't that accurate?
Well, no, because these global elites are supranational. They take their money out of the United States. They don't pay taxes, and I mean, the goal obviously is to get out of the stock market as fast as they can. I mean, we saw them loot the U.S. Treasury in 2008, I think to the tune of $7 trillion. And then they turned around and used the CARES Act to loot the U.S. Treasury again because of the pandemic. And there's nothing to stop them from a third time going in and looting the U.S. Treasury. The problem is then increasingly the U.S. dollar becomes worthless. And then you start raising the specter of hyperinflation. I mean, the Fed, for the mantra since the Reagan administration has been no interest, no inflation, no inflation, no inflation. And that has really driven monetary policy. It's ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't help anybody but the super rich. Because if there's inflation, for instance, and you're a debtor, then inflation will by itself reduce your debt. And that's what the corporations don't want. But you are flirting with economic collapse. But these people have built bubbles, international bubbles. I'm not talking about the Jeff Bezos of the world. I mean, look at the billionaire class just in the pandemic. I don't remember the latest figure, but they've increased their wealth by like $500 billion, it's ridiculous. A handful of people. And that's who, as Rick Wolf has pointed out correctly, that's who has essentially benefited from the CARES Act. We're talking about a very, very tiny group of extremely wealthy individuals.
I don't think anyone has benefited from the CARES Act. Even the money they sent to, the middle class, the people, just went to the banks via them paying their rent.
Well, yes, precisely. I mean, so, what did they do? They gave people a one-time stimulus check, and they gave people, expanded the unemployment figure to $600 up until the end of July. And right, where did it go? Went to the landlord, it went to, Visa or MasterCard. Of course, it got sucked up because almost everyone in the country lives in debt peonage.
It's money laundering for the banks, just through you and I, as has
right.
said. Chris, you've spoken about us going through this slow motion corporate coup d'etat. I still am not sure how corporations, are they completely detached from consumers, and don't they need people to use their stuff? Or are they, as we see throughout this pandemic, people aren't going on cruises, and yet the government is still giving them a ton of money. They're completely detached from the consumer class, or?
Well, the consumer class it's the speculators who drive the economic system now. People who gamble with money, who use money to make more money. They don't actually produce anything. I mean, so all this money that the Fed has handed out, it hasn't gone into producing anything or creating more jobs. It's just you sent trillions of funds or tax breaks to oil companies to keep them afloat. The airline industry, that got $50 billion in stimulus money. As I mentioned, the cruise industry, $170 billion windfall for the real estate industry. Lobbying groups were bailed out. Private equity firms, these people don't make anything. They give a lot of money. I mean, lobbying groups, the political action committees give about $200 million a year to politicians over the last couple of decades. The meat industry has been bailed out. I guess they make meat. Corporations that have moved offshore to avoid U.S. taxes have gotten bailed out. 80% of the tax breaks under the stimulus package went to millionaires. 454 billion, remember, went to this thing called the Treasury Department's Exchange Stabilization Fund. That's this big slush fund that nobody knows where the money's going. It's not accountable, which the Trump administration is just handing out to its cronies. And it can be leveraged. It can be leveraged 10 to 1 to create 4.5 trillion in assets. There was a 1.5 trillion loan to Wall Street, which no one thinks will be paid back. So all of this money has gone to sustain a class of speculators. I mean, speculation in the 17th century in Europe was considered a capital crime. Speculators were hanged. But that's who's running the economy. It's not the old Rockefeller or Carnegie's, because we don't make anything except weapons. We don't make anything anymore in the United States. That's all made by sweatshop labor in Monterrey, Mexico, or China, or Vietnam, or Bangladesh.
Turning to the recent death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Your reaction to that situation, her death, what's happening, the effect on labor unions, the effect on...
We must never forget that it was Joe Biden who gave us Anthony Scalia and Clarence Thomas. The Democrats are kind of quiet about that.
Aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, these are two of the worst modern Supreme Court justices in decades. And Biden was their champion. I mean, he's the one who humiliated Anita Hill.
Why doesn't he just run on those? I mean, they're just trying to get Republicans to vote for him.
Well, yeah, that's the whole ridiculous strategy. I mean, it's all about polling, which has nothing to do with politics, just anti-politics. But my deep worry is that we're back at 2016. Remember the day before the election, I think the New York Times had some graphic that said that Hillary Clinton had an 84% chance of winning. I mean, it was at least that. I don't know where they get this stuff from. And we're just watching the same thing. But we're playing a really dangerous game. I mean, first of all, the Democrats aren't on the ground. They're not going door to door. The Trump base, which is neo-fascist, is certainly whipped up. And
that's why you don't see any Joe Biden lawn signs. People are afraid to put them out there.
Well, also Biden, I mean, how could you possibly be enthusiastic for Joe Biden? There's nothing there. I mean, this is a guy who is absolutely empty in terms of a moral or intellectual foundation. Has spent his entire career serving moneyed interest. I mean, they used to call him Senator Credit Card from Delaware because that's where the credit card companies are. Which, by the way, employed his son Hunter for very lavish fees. There isn't. He has said to Wall Street in this campaign there'll be no change in regulations, no change in laws. I mean, the best thing he has going for him is that he's not Trump, and that's kind of what they're playing. The oligarchs like him because he'll bring back a kind of decorum to our imperial presidency and to the empire. But there's a reason he's the nominee. I mean, Lloyd Blankfein and all the other big Democratic donors were very public about this, that if Bernie Sanders was the nominee, they were voting for Trump. I mean, the whole least worst option only applies to you and me. It doesn't apply to them. So they know very well that their interests will be protected, that there won't be any kind of systemic change within what you called it a corporate coup d'etat, which is a term John Ralston Saul coined, which is correct, that the corporate state will continue to consolidate power and money, whether it's Biden or Trump. They prefer Biden, but they can live with Trump. But I hope that the polls are right. But I mean, we did go through this in 2016, and they weren't even close.
If you hope that the polls are right, so you do believe on some level a Joe Biden presidency might be slightly better than what we're seeing now?
Well, he's not insane. I don't think the social situation will be better, or the political or the economic situation. But Trump is so volatile and so inept. I mean, the best we could say about Biden is that we might respond rationally to the COVID-19 crisis, which is totally out of control, and is is going to probably keep hitting the American public in wave after wave after wave with incredibly serious health and economic consequences. I mean, there's just such a deep, I think we all feel it, personal animus towards Trump. He's just so revolting. I'm not going to vote for Biden. I haven't voted for a Democrat since 2000. I'll vote for Howie Hawkins and the Green Party. I also live in New Jersey. So I mean, if I lived in Mississippi, I probably still would, but it'd be a little harder. Yeah. I mean, the system itself is going down either way.
You said that the only way we're going to be able to fight is to rebuild communal structures and social bonds that allow us to resist. How do we do that now that we're all locked in our houses with the COVID?
Well, not all people are locked in their houses with COVID. There are a lot of courageous kids out on the streets following these police killings, and that's how you do it. And I think what's interesting about a lot of these protests which ostensibly are about police violence, but I think my sense is they're far more than that. I think that there's a political sophistication. They get that these issues are structural, which is why they're not being gaslighted by Nancy Pelosi or Muriel Brower in Washington, who paints 35-foot high letters, Black Lives Matter, and then calls for a $50 million funding increase for the police and a bond issue to build a $500 million new jail. They get it, and that it's about abolition. It's not about reform. We've tried all the reforms, and they don't work. The increasing money and quote unquote professionalization of the police has just made it more lethal and more unaccountable. So I think there's certainly an understanding that the system itself is unresponsive, and of course that frightens the elites. But that's going to be as true under Biden as it is under Trump.
Yeah, I want the middle class to be out in the street. How long until that happens?
Well, it's when the shrinking middle class is no longer the middle class.
So pretty soon, that's coming. What we're saying. Yeah. Oh. Well, I always like getting the truth from you, Chris. That's what people count on, even though it can be kind of hard to process. You just kind of answered the question that I had about your dislike for this country's penchant for hope, but we don't have an exciting candidate to rally around, like we would had we got Bernie Sanders. It's almost slightly unimaginable as how things will get worse. It's pretty bad already, having worked in mental health, seeing people, suicide rates going up, domestic violence going up, incidents of, people radicalizing themselves, which leads to increased everything horrible. Let's just put it that way. How do people deal with this on the inside if hope is troubling?
By resisting. I think that's what you've seen in whether it's Ferguson or Kenosha or anywhere else. It's taking agency. It's coming together to stand up against these gross injustices. That's hope is an act. Hope is about finding solidarity and getting out and making your voice heard, even if things continue to get worse. Isolating yourself is a route always to despair. It's about resistance. And that resistance itself is a form of freedom, even if you don't succeed.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was very well put, as usual. And I really do appreciate you coming on this show. As you know, we have an audience of activists, basically, and we try to provide people information and well, I don't want to say hope, but it's hope.
Sure. Well, that's where hope lies. I mean, I've said it many times. I don't fight fascists because I'm going to win. I fight fascists because they're fascists.
Chris Hedges, we look forward to the new book coming out. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You can follow Chris Hedges on Twitter so you can know exactly when the book is coming out at Chris Lynn Hedges, Lynn. You're watching Act TV. Stick with us. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe by hitting the subscribe button or even the like button. Like and subscribe and share. That helps. I'm Julianna Forlano. You can find me mostly on Twitter. I don't tweet a lot, but when I do, it's occasionally entertaining. And follow Act TV all over the place because, we're doing our best to be ubiquitous on social media platforms to fight the right-wing spin that you see there.